I was celebrating Mass the first time at that parish, in my previous parish. And there was a Latino community there, and I work in 3 languages. But this is the first time this had ever happened. I celebrated Mass, again, for the first time in this community, to the Latino community. And when I ended Mass, I ended it as I normally would. La misa es terminada, podemos ir en la paz. Mass is ended, let us go in peace. Well, immediately one of the sacristans, a woman from El Salvador, came out and she says, no. La misa no termina nunca, la misa no termina nunca, which means the Mass never ends. By the way, she's right. The Mass does never end. The word Mass comes from the Latin word mittere, which means to send out. And what it really means is after the liturgy, everyone at Mass is sent out to go bring the gospel of Christ that they've experienced in the liturgy. So the Mass doesn't end, and she was right. The woman actually felt sad, inadequate, for 2 things. 1, she was a woman, and 2, she only had a 2nd grade education. But this is the person who, by the way, reminded me, and in a sense, re-educated me to basic Catholic theology. It's an important message there. All of us are called to evangelize and to be part of the church's message of the gospel, of spreading the gospel. Today's gospel reading about the disciples on the way to Emmaus illustrates it very well and quite powerfully. We see the story where the 2 disciples are on their way to Emmaus, completely confused. What is this going on? What's happening? And of course, Jesus, disguised as a stranger, appears and explains to them, after he hears their trepidation, explains to them that everything that happened was supposed to happen. So as we look further at this, we can see that powerful message that Jesus is communicating to them. Trust that this was supposed to happen. But there's a powerful line in there, and even the Catechism of the Catholic Church says there's an important line. And the line is where the 2 disciples say, and some women in our company say that his tomb was empty, and some of our brothers went to go see it and found out it exactly as they said. The reason why that line is important is because the women had been the first ones to proclaim that the tomb was empty. And by the way, and this is the way it's written, who's going to listen to the women? They're just filled with idle talk. The reason why it's written like that is not as an insult, it's to realize that the Lord has called everyone, all the people who are in touch with him, to go out and spread the gospel. The concept that you have to be an expert now to do that is done. And that's why he chose the women to go out and say to the rest, go out and let them know that he is risen. Because that's the message that everyone has to bring, and none of us has an excuse not to bring it. That's the point. And it's a powerful point to make. That's the point of my first story. There she is turning around and saying, but I've only had a 2nd grade education. I'm not a priest. I'm not educated. I don't have a degree. I'm not ordained. But she's the one who brings the message. And that's the reality. In fact, the story about the Mass not ending is so true. It is the lay people who are called to bring the message out into the world. It's not the priest. So if you're a lay person watching this, you have a greater call than I do. My call is to preach to you, and your call is to preach to the world. Now, can I preach to the world? Yes. But you have to preach to the world. You're called to do it as well. Locally here in Boston, there were several media outlets that really tried to undermine this. And they would say that it is Catholic teaching that lay people are only called to pay, pray, and obey, which is a lie. And I often name the media outlet, which I'm not going to do on YouTube, and I often tell people that's a lie. And it is. It's a lie, because at the end of the baptismal rite, every person who's baptized is commissioned to go out and proclaim the faith of the Lord. It's may your ears be open to hear his word and your lips to proclaim his faith to the praise and glory of God the Father. That's this rite that happens is the last rite in baptism. So it's a powerful reality, it's a powerful truth that the lay people are called to preach the gospel. Now, when are they called to do this? And are there exceptions? Well, you do it within the context of your life, mostly with the way you live your life. But then also, sometimes you may be called, you may actually be used by the Holy Spirit unknowingly. And there's a situation where that happened. One of the experts who was part of one of those Change the Church groups, which we later found was a front for one of our political parties, came from a convention, a Catholic convention. And I happened to be outside where the convention was, literally outside, I wasn't even in the convention. And she sees me dressed as a priest, and she comes over to talk to me because her role was to recruit the clergy into her organization. Well, at the same time, this person who apparently suffered from some kind of serious mental illness, who was what appeared to be homeless, saw me as a priest and wanted me to give a message to Cardinal O'Malley. So he comes over to see me. So they basically approach me at the same time, and of course the expert tries to recruit me into her organization, whereas this man looks at both of us and he says, "Hey, can you tell me who Carol Wojtyla is?" And the expert says, "I don't know, but I bet she's a woman of good faith." I almost fell to the ground laughing, because the expert did not know, who was there to recruit the clergy into her organization that's seeking to keep the faith and change the church. The expert didn't know that Carol Wojtyla was Pope John Paul II. And the Lord, speaking through a man who was most likely homeless, who had a rather serious mental illness, still speaking through him to preach the gospel and show the truth. We don't have an excuse not to live the gospel. We just don't. You can try to come up with an excuse. You don't. To live and to preach the gospel. These are powerful words that we've always got to understand. And one of the powerful ways we can understand that is something that's taught in many seminaries on the first day of theology school. And what they teach on the first day of theology school to each of the seminarians is this. And if it's a good theology school, they will teach this basic teaching. Your grandmother knows more theology than you will ever learn here. That's the message. Because we're all called to bring the message of the gospel. Now, I may know all the technical stuff, but if I turn around and say, "Well, I'm the priest and I know better, I'm the expert," I'll never learn and deepen my faith, because the Lord uses all of us to spread the faith. My role as the ordained is to do the sacramental role and to preach at Mass. But my role is not to say, only I can preach. The Lord will use whomever He wants, and you've been commissioned to preach at your baptism. By the way, so have I at my baptism. By the way, so has the bishop at his baptism. So you can see that reality, that all of us have that mission to go out into the world and preach the gospel. We don't have an excuse, because the Lord said at baptism, "Go, proclaim my faith to the praise and glory of God the Father." And whether we are lay, ordained, men, women, whether we have some kind of serious illness, whether we are perfectly healthy, whether we speak English or Spanish or Portuguese or Latin or Swahili or any of the other languages, Mongolian Chinese, is it Mongolian? Mandarin Chinese, I'm sorry, or Mongolian, what they speak in Mongolia, we have no excuse. The Lord has called us to preach the gospel. God bless you.